You just handcuffed the one man the Pentagon has been trying to reach for the last hour." The words had not been spoken yet, but within minutes they would change every life standing outside Westbrook Mall on that bright Saturday afternoon. The parking lot shimmered beneath the late summer sun as families pushed shopping carts toward their cars. Children carried oversized stuffed animals from the arcade, and the smell of fresh pretzels drifted through the warm air. Near the main entrance, a small crowd slowly gathered around a calm, broad-shouldered black man wearing faded jeans, worn work boots, and a weathered navy blue ball cap embroidered with a gold Navy SEAL trident. His name was Marcus Hayes, though no one there knew it. To them, he looked like another middle-aged veteran trying to hold on to old glory. Officer Daniel Brooks certainly believed that. The white patrol officer stepped confidently across the sidewalk, his polished badge catching the afternoon light as curious shoppers instinctively moved aside. His eyes settled on the trident stitched across Marcus's cap before drifting to the old challenge coin hanging from a simple leather lanyard around his neck. Daniel had seen imitation military gear before. Every Memorial Day and 4th of July someone tried to impress strangers with stories that never happened. Today, he thought, he had found another one. "Sir, I'd like to ask you a few questions," Daniel said, keeping one hand near his duty belt while maintaining the calm authority expected from an experienced officer. Marcus slowly turned, meeting the officer's eyes without the slightest sign of irritation. His expression carried the quiet patience of someone who had spent years solving problems without raising his voice. "Of course, officer," he answered gently. "Is something wrong?" Daniel pointed toward the trident. "People say you've been telling folks you're a Navy SEAL." Marcus glanced briefly at the embroidered cap before looking back. "I never said anything to anyone. Someone asked about the insignia. I answered honestly." A teenager standing nearby lifted his phone, sensing entertainment. Within seconds, several more phones appeared. The invisible circle of spectators widened. Marcus noticed them, but said nothing. Daniel folded his arms. "Mind showing me your identification?" Marcus nodded without hesitation and carefully reached toward his wallet. Every movement was slow, respectful, almost deliberate, as though he understood exactly how easily ordinary moments could become misunderstandings. He handed over his driver's license without another word. Daniel studied it briefly. Marcus Hayes, North Carolina, age 52. Nothing unusual. Yet something about the old challenge coin continued to bother him. "Do you have military identification?" Daniel asked. Marcus hesitated for the first time. It was only a heartbeat, barely visible unless someone was watching closely. "Not on me," he replied quietly. "I'm retired." Daniel's jaw tightened. Convenient answer. Marcus remained composed. "It's the truthful one." A few people exchanged skeptical looks. Someone whispered, "Stolen valor." Another quietly nodded. Marcus heard every word. His face never changed. The breeze lifted the brim of his old cap, while the afternoon sunlight revealed faint gray at his temples. He looked less like a man seeking attention and more like someone hoping to disappear into the crowd with the birthday gift tucked neatly inside the shopping bag resting beside his feet. Daniel noticed the bag, but ignored it. In his mind, the case had already been decided. "Sir," he said firmly, "I'm going to need you to come with me while we verify your claims." Marcus looked toward the families still walking into the mall, then back at the officer. "Officer Brooks," he said with remarkable calm after reading the embroidered name on the uniform. "Before we go any further, please make one phone call. Contact Naval Special Warfare Command. They'll verify everything." Daniel let out a short laugh that carried farther than he intended. "That's not how this works." Marcus lowered his eyes for only a second before answering with the same measured tone. "No, officer. It's exactly how this works. I just hope it isn't too late." Marcus did not repeat himself. He simply stood where he was, hands visible, shoulders relaxed, allowing the afternoon breeze to ripple the faded fabric of his shirt. There was something unusual about the silence he carried. It was not the silence of fear or surrender. It was the silence of a man who had learned long ago that raising his voice rarely changed another person's mind. Officer Daniel Brooks interpreted that silence differently. To him, it looked like someone running out of excuses. He gestured toward his patrol vehicle parked near the curb while another officer quietly arrived to observe the situation. The growing crowd sensed that something bigger was unfolding. Parents slowed their shopping carts. Store employees stepped outside the entrance beneath the shaded overhang. A delivery driver paused beside his truck without even realizing he had stopped walking. Marcus glanced once toward the shopping bag resting on the sidewalk. Bright blue wrapping paper peeked from the top, beside a small birthday card decorated with colorful balloons. Daniel followed his gaze. "Is that yours?" he asked. "Yes," Marcus answered softly. "It is for my granddaughter. She turns 8 today." Daniel looked at the neatly wrapped package for only a moment before returning to business. "Someone else can give it to her." Marcus lowered his eyes briefly, almost as if calculating time instead of distance. "I promised I would be there before dinner." Daniel sighed. "That depends on how quickly we clear this up." Marcus nodded once. "It can be cleared up in less than 2 minutes if the right call is made." The officer ignored the suggestion again. Nearby, a woman whispered to her husband that the man did not seem dangerous. Her husband shrugged, pointing toward the old Navy cap. "If he is pretending, that is serious." Marcus heard the exchange, but remained focused on Daniel. Years earlier, he had learned that strangers often built stories from appearances long before they searched for facts. It no longer surprised him. What still saddened him was how quickly certainty replaced curiosity. Daniel handed Marcus's driver's license to the second officer, asking him to begin checking available records. As the information was entered into the patrol computer, nothing unusual appeared. No warrants. No criminal history. No active alerts. Clean. Daniel frowned slightly. People pretending to have military backgrounds often had complicated histories. Marcus's record was almost spotless. "What do you do for work now?" Daniel asked. "I consult from time to time," Marcus replied. "Mostly I enjoy being with my family." "Consult for whom?" Marcus smiled politely. "That answer would not help us today." Daniel folded his notebook, closed with a quiet snap. "You are making this harder than it needs to be." "Actually," Marcus answered in the same calm voice, "I am trying to make it easier." Another breeze swept across the parking lot, carrying the distant laughter of children leaving the movie theater. Somewhere inside the mall, a pianist began playing a familiar patriotic melody that drifted faintly through the open entrance. Marcus looked toward the sound for only an instant before his attention returned to the officer standing in front of him. There was no resentment in his expression, only a quiet weariness that seemed older than his years. Daniel noticed it, but could not explain why it unsettled him. Most people argued. Some became defensive. Others demanded lawyers or supervisors. Marcus had done none of those things. Instead, he continued offering the same simple solution. "Verify the truth." The second officer suddenly looked up from the computer. "His record is clean," he said. "Nothing comes back except a retired address history and a current concealed carry permit." Daniel nodded without changing his posture. "No military verification? Not in the civilian database." Marcus spoke before either officer continued. "Because you are searching the wrong database." The words were not arrogant. They were spoken almost gently, like a teacher correcting a small mistake without embarrassing a student. Daniel stared at him for several long seconds. The afternoon seemed strangely quieter than before. Even the people filming had lowered their phones slightly, sensing that whatever happened next would determine whether this ordinary Saturday became just another forgotten misunderstanding or the beginning of something none of them could possibly imagine. Daniel Brooks had built his career on trusting instinct. For nearly 12 years, he had worn the badge believing that hesitation created mistakes while confidence prevented them. Looking across the parking lot, every instinct he possessed insisted that Marcus Hayes was hiding something. The calm voice, the careful words, the refusal to become emotional all felt rehearsed to him. He had encountered convincing stories before, and every one of them had eventually fallen apart. He was determined that this one would be no different. "Sir," Daniel said firmly, "I have given you several opportunities to explain yourself." Marcus answered with the same measured expression that never seemed to change. "And I have given you the same answer every time because it is still the truth." Daniel shook his head. "You keep asking me to make one phone call." "Because one phone call ends this," Marcus replied. "You are assuming I have to prove myself." Daniel looked directly into his eyes. "Do you not?" Marcus smiled faintly. "No, officer. Facts prove themselves. People only have to be willing to find them." The words lingered in the warm afternoon air longer than anyone expected. Even several people standing nearby exchanged uncertain glances. The confidence Marcus carried did not resemble the confidence of someone bluffing. It resembled experience. Daniel refused to let that impression influence his judgment. He motioned toward the shopping bag once again. "Search the bag," he instructed the second officer. Marcus immediately nodded. "Go ahead. There is nothing in there except a birthday gift, a greeting card, and a receipt." The officer carefully opened the bag while curious shoppers leaned forward. Inside rested a boxed science kit for children, a handwritten birthday card, colorful tissue paper, and nothing remotely suspicious. Daniel frowned. "Anything else?" "No, sir," the officer answered. Marcus quietly added, "Emma loves building things. She says she wants to become an engineer someday." For the first time, Daniel heard warmth enter Marcus's voice. It lasted only a moment before his calm composure returned. Daniel noticed the handwritten card lying inside the bag. Across the front were the words, "Happy birthday, Emma. Love, Grandpa." The handwriting was steady but unmistakably personal. Daniel suddenly found himself looking at Marcus differently, not because he believed him, but because nothing about the man matched the image he had formed only minutes earlier. Before he could speak again, the second officer reached into the outside pocket of Marcus's backpack. "There is another phone in here," he said. Daniel looked over. It was unlike any cellular phone he had seen. Matte black. No visible company logo. No colorful applications on the screen. Only a small secure display showing the current time beside a blinking notification. The words across the top read, "Priority Alpha." Daniel took the device into his own hands. "Interesting," he murmured. "Government surplus?" Marcus's expression became more serious than it had been all afternoon. "Officer Brooks, I respectfully ask that you do not attempt to unlock that device." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "Why?" "Because someone is expecting to reach me." "Who?" Marcus paused for just a second. "People whose schedule is more important than mine." Several people nearby quietly laughed, assuming it was another clever excuse. Daniel almost smiled himself. "That is a new one." Marcus did not react. "You asked me earlier what I do now. Sometimes I help solve problems. Today happens to be one of those days." Daniel looked down at the screen. The notification light flashed again before disappearing. Seconds later it flashed once more. Then again. 3 missed secure calls. Daniel pressed the side button to silence the alert. Marcus slowly exhaled, but said nothing. Across the parking lot, the distant rumble of thunder rolled beyond the clear blue horizon, although no clouds had yet reached the mall. The breeze that followed carried a strange stillness with it. Daniel slipped the secure phone into an evidence pouch, while Marcus quietly watched. There was no anger in his face, no panic, only the unmistakable look of someone realizing that time had just become far more valuable than anyone standing there understood. Daniel Brooks sealed the evidence pouch and handed it to the second officer without another glance at the unusual phone. To him, it was simply another item waiting to be documented. Marcus watched the exchange with steady eyes, his shoulders still relaxed despite the growing tension surrounding them. He knew exactly what had just happened. The one device that mattered most had been disconnected from the people expecting an answer. He took a slow breath before speaking again. "Officer Brooks, I understand you believe you are doing your job. I respect that. But I am asking you one last time. Please contact Naval Special Warfare Command before this situation becomes much larger than either of us wants." Daniel adjusted the radio on his shoulder. "You keep saying the same thing. Because the truth has not changed." "The truth," Daniel replied, "is that I have a man claiming military credentials with no military identification." Marcus answered immediately. "I never asked you to accept my word. I asked you to verify it." Daniel looked toward the second officer, who gave a small shrug as if to say the decision was entirely his. The crowd continued growing, although the mood had changed. The early whispers and quiet laughter had faded into cautious silence. Even those recording with their phones sensed there was something unusual about the man standing calmly beside the patrol car. He had never raised his voice. He had never argued. He had never attempted to leave. Marcus slowly reached into his back pocket. Daniel instinctively lifted a hand. "Do not move too quickly." Marcus nodded. "It is only my wallet." With careful movements, he removed a thin, weathered leather wallet and opened it. Instead of cash, family photographs slid slightly into view. Daniel could not help noticing one picture of an elderly woman smiling from a porch swing, another of a young girl proudly holding a school science trophy, and another of Marcus wearing an ordinary baseball cap, while helping the same little girl build what appeared to be a homemade model rocket in a backyard. There were no photographs of military ceremonies, no medals displayed for attention, no attempt to impress anyone. Marcus quietly closed the wallet again. I stopped carrying those memories years ago, he said. Daniel frowned. What memories? Marcus looked toward the American flag waving above the mall entrance. The ones that belonged to people who never came home. Some things should stay with the families, not inside my wallet. Daniel remained silent. Something about the answer felt too genuine to dismiss, yet he refused to let emotion replace procedure. Before he could respond, the evidence pouch emitted a faint vibration. The secure phone inside had come alive again. A soft tone sounded once, then stopped. Everyone nearby looked toward the pouch. Another vibration followed only seconds later. Then another. The small display illuminated through the transparent plastic. Incoming secure call. Daniel ignored it. The phone stopped ringing. 5 seconds later it rang again. This time the display showed the same message followed by a line of red text. Immediate response requested. The second officer shifted uneasily. That is a persistent caller. Daniel reached for the pouch and pressed the side button again, silencing the alert without answering. Marcus closed his eyes briefly, not out of frustration, but disappointment. Officer, he said quietly, someone on the other end believes I am already late. Daniel answered with firm confidence. Then they can wait. Marcus slowly shook his head. No, they probably cannot. The breeze carried another distant rumble across the parking lot, though the sky above remained bright and clear. Somewhere inside the mall, the large clock above the central atrium chimed the top of the hour. Marcus glanced instinctively toward the sound before looking back at Daniel. Time matters now more than ever. Daniel folded his arms once again. You keep talking as though the world depends on this phone call. Marcus met his eyes without hesitation. Today, Officer Brooks, it just might. The parking lot had become strangely quiet. It was not because people had stopped watching. It was because no one seemed willing to interrupt whatever was unfolding in front of them. Even the children who had been laughing near the fountain now stood beside their parents, sensing the weight in the adults' faces without understanding why. Marcus Hayes remained exactly where he had been from the beginning, calm, patient, his eyes following neither the cameras nor the growing crowd. His attention stayed on Officer Daniel Brooks, as though he still believed one honest conversation could prevent everything that was about to happen. Daniel reached for his shoulder radio and spoke to dispatch. Run another verification on Marcus Hayes. Check retired military records, if available. A burst of static answered before the dispatcher replied. Negative. Civilian access only. Nothing additional available. Daniel nodded. Understood. He clipped the radio back onto his shoulder, convinced the matter was settled. Marcus quietly lowered his head for a brief moment. Officer Brooks, he said, you have done what your system allows. Now please contact someone whose system is different. Daniel shook his head. That is enough. Marcus looked toward the evidence pouch, where the secure phone rested. No, sir. It is not. Before either man could continue, the pouch vibrated again. This time the tone was louder. Longer. Impossible to ignore. Several people instinctively turned toward the sound. Daniel frowned and removed the phone from the pouch. Across the dark screen appeared a new message unlike the earlier notifications. Secure priority override. Incoming call. Authentication required. The call ended before Daniel answered. 3 seconds later the phone rang again. Then again. Then a fourth time. Each call arrived almost immediately after the previous one. The second officer shifted uneasily. Whoever that is, they are not giving up. Daniel pressed the decline button once more. They will. Marcus slowly inhaled. No. They are escalating. Daniel looked up. Escalating to what? Marcus answered with complete certainty. The next person on the notification list. The words barely left his mouth before Daniel's own department radio crackled sharply. Officer Brooks, acknowledge. Daniel immediately answered. Brooks here. Dispatch sounded different now, less casual than before. Stand by. Lieutenant Harris needs to speak with you immediately. Daniel glanced at Marcus before responding. Go ahead. A new voice came over the radio. Calm. Serious. Brooks, what exactly is happening at Westbrook Mall? Daniel briefly summarized the situation. Possible military impersonation. Subject refuses to verify credentials. Several seconds passed without a reply. Then Lieutenant Harris spoke again. Did you recover an unusual communication device? Daniel's expression tightened. Yes, sir. Has it been receiving repeated secure calls? Daniel looked down at the phone in his hand. Another vibration pulsed through the device. Yes, sir. The lieutenant hesitated. Do not power it off. Daniel frowned. Already declined several calls. Silence followed. Longer than before. Finally, the lieutenant answered quietly. That may become a problem. Daniel felt the first small crack appear in his certainty. What do you mean? Before Harris could answer, another voice interrupted over the radio, one Daniel had never heard before. Older, sharper. Officer Brooks, this is Captain Evelyn Ross. Keep that device active. We have received multiple inquiries from federal channels asking why one of their secure communications has gone silent. Daniel's eyes narrowed. Federal channels? Yes. Marcus remained completely still, saying nothing. Captain Ross continued. I need you to tell me something very carefully. Is Marcus Hayes with you right now? Daniel looked directly at Marcus. Yes, Captain. Another pause. This one felt even heavier. Do not move him from that location until we understand exactly who he is. Daniel lowered the radio slowly. For the first time that afternoon, he looked at Marcus not as a suspect, but as a question that suddenly seemed much larger than he had imagined. Marcus simply met his eyes with the same calm expression he had carried from the very beginning. Officer, he said softly, we are almost out of time. The afternoon sunlight softened as thin clouds drifted across the sky, muting the glare that had covered the parking lot only minutes before. It was as if the entire scene had taken one long, silent breath. No one spoke. The shoppers who had gathered around the patrol vehicles now stood quietly, their earlier confidence replaced by uncertainty. Phones that had been held high to record. The encounter slowly lowered, not because people had lost interest, but because the moment no longer felt like entertainment. Officer Daniel Brooks remained still with the department radio resting against his shoulder, replaying Captain Ross's words in his mind. Federal channels. Secure communications. Do not move him. None of it fit the picture he had built since walking toward Marcus Hayes outside the mall entrance. Daniel looked again at the man standing a few feet away. Marcus had not changed his posture once. His hands remained relaxed. His breathing was slow and steady. Even now, with dozens of strangers watching him, there was no frustration in his face. There was only patience, the kind earned through years of waiting for people to discover the truth on their own. A light breeze stirred the small American flag mounted near the mall entrance, its fabric making a quiet flutter that seemed louder than the conversations had been earlier. Marcus lifted his eyes toward it for only a second before looking back toward the shopping bag still resting beside the curb. The colorful wrapping paper had shifted slightly in the wind, revealing the corner of the birthday card inside. Emma would probably be looking at the clock by now, wondering whether Grandpa had left the store yet. The thought crossed Marcus's mind without changing his expression. Promises mattered to him, whether they involved family or country. Daniel noticed where Marcus was looking. Your granddaughter is expecting you, he said quietly, almost without thinking. Marcus nodded once. She believes I never miss birthdays. Daniel looked away. Something about those words settled heavily in his chest. For the first time all afternoon, he wondered whether he had been asking the wrong questions. Instead of wondering who Marcus claimed to be, perhaps he should have been asking why someone so calm had repeatedly encouraged verification instead of demanding belief. The second officer quietly stepped beside Daniel and spoke in a voice barely above a whisper. He has had every chance to become angry. Daniel answered just as softly. I noticed. Most people would have argued by now. Daniel did not reply. Marcus overheard the exchange, but remained silent. He had spent enough years in difficult situations to understand that silence often carried farther than speeches. Across the parking lot, the sounds of traffic continued as if the rest of the world had no idea that something extraordinary was slowly unfolding outside a suburban shopping center. A little girl holding her mother's hand glanced toward Marcus before asking, Mom, is that man in trouble? Her mother hesitated before answering. I do not know, sweetheart. Marcus heard the child and offered her a small, reassuring smile. The little girl smiled back instinctively before her mother gently led her away. Daniel watched the brief exchange with quiet surprise. Nothing about Marcus suggested someone trying to deceive others. Instead, he carried himself like a man accustomed to responsibility without needing recognition. The secure phone remained silent now, resting inside the evidence pouch as though waiting for the next chapter to begin. The stillness felt unnatural, almost too perfect, like the calm surface of a lake hiding unseen movement beneath it. Daniel glanced toward the horizon where darker clouds had begun gathering in the distance. He could not explain why, but he suddenly felt that the silence surrounding them was not the end of the situation. It was only the pause before the truth finally arrived. The silence finally broke with the distant sound of approaching engines. At first it blended into the ordinary traffic surrounding the shopping center, but within seconds everyone noticed the difference. Two dark government sport utility vehicles turned into the parking lot without flashing lights or sirens, moving with quiet precision before stopping several yards from the patrol cars. The doors opened almost simultaneously. Men and women dressed in plain business attire stepped out first, each wearing a small federal credential clipped discreetly beneath a jacket. They were followed by a tall Navy captain whose crisp uniform immediately drew every eye in the parking lot. The conversation stopped. Even Officer Daniel Brooks instinctively straightened his posture. The captain did not hurry. He walked with measured confidence directly toward Marcus Hayes, his polished shoes clicking softly against the pavement. Halfway there he paused, looked toward Daniel, and spoke in a calm voice that carried across the silent crowd. "Which officer has custody of Mr. Marcus Hayes?" Daniel stepped forward. "That would be me, sir." The captain gave a single respectful nod before continuing toward Marcus. What happened next erased every remaining doubt from the faces surrounding them. Instead of questioning Marcus, instead of demanding identification, the captain stopped a few feet away and offered a formal salute. Marcus returned it with quiet dignity. Neither man smiled. The exchange carried the unmistakable weight of mutual respect earned over many years. One of the federal officials quietly accepted the secure phone from the evidence pouch. The device illuminated almost instantly. After entering a brief authentication sequence, the official answered the waiting call. "Yes, sir," he said. "We have located Mr. Hayes." He listened for several moments before lowering the phone and handing it directly to Marcus. Marcus accepted it calmly. Marcus Hayes speaking. His voice remained steady despite dozens of people listening in complete silence. "Yes, sir. I understand. I apologize for the delay. There was an unexpected interruption." He listened again, nodded once, and answered, "I can still make the briefing if transportation is ready." The call ended only seconds later. Marcus returned the phone without another word. Daniel could hardly process what he had witnessed. The Navy captain finally turned toward him. There was no anger in the officer's face, only professional seriousness. "Officer Brooks, thank you for ensuring Mr. Hayes remained safe." Daniel blinked in confusion. "Safe?" "Yes," the captain replied. "Mr. Hayes is a retired Navy SEAL and currently serves as a cleared consultant supporting sensitive national defense programs. We have been attempting to reach him for nearly an hour regarding an urgent briefing." Daniel's throat tightened. He told me to verify." "He did." The captain looked briefly toward Marcus before continuing. "Mr. Hayes has spent much of his career avoiding recognition rather than seeking it. If he asked you to verify his identity instead of simply believing him, that should have told you something about his character." The second officer quietly lowered his eyes. Around them, the crowd that had once whispered accusations now stood completely still. Several people slowly put away their phones. No one seemed interested in recording anymore. A middle-aged man who had earlier muttered the words "stolen valor" removed his baseball cap and held it respectfully against his chest. Marcus glanced toward the birthday gift still resting beside the curb. The captain noticed. "Your granddaughter?" Marcus smiled softly for the first time all afternoon. "She is turning 8 today." The captain checked his watch. "Our aircraft can adjust the schedule. Family comes first when possible." Marcus gave a grateful nod. Daniel looked from the wrapped gift to the quiet man standing before him and finally understood what had been directly in front of him since the beginning. Marcus had never demanded respect. He had simply trusted that the truth would eventually arrive on its own. Daniel Brooks stood motionless, the weight of the afternoon settling onto his shoulders in a way his body armor never had. The crowd no longer looked at Marcus Hayes with suspicion. Instead, every eye shifted toward the officer who had been so certain only minutes earlier. The Navy captain quietly accepted a folder from one of the federal officials, reviewed a single page, and nodded with visible relief. "Mr. Hayes," he said, "Washington has confirmed the briefing has been delayed by 20 minutes. They instructed us to make certain you are able to see your granddaughter first." Marcus released a slow breath that almost sounded like gratitude. "Thank you, Captain." His eyes drifted back to the brightly wrapped birthday gift resting beside the curb. It had waited patiently through every misunderstanding, just as he had. Daniel swallowed before taking 2 careful steps toward Marcus. For the first time since the encounter began, his voice carried none of the confidence that had defined it earlier. "Mr. Hayes, I owe you an apology." Marcus turned to face him without the slightest trace of resentment. Daniel continued, choosing each word carefully. "I believed I was protecting the public, but I stopped listening once I convinced myself I already knew the answer. You asked me to verify the facts. I chose my assumptions instead." The parking lot remained completely silent. Even the federal officials allowed the conversation to unfold without interruption. Marcus looked at Daniel for several long seconds before answering. "Officer Brooks, every profession depends on judgment. Soldiers make decisions. Police officers make decisions. Doctors make decisions. None of us gets every decision right." Daniel lowered his eyes. "That does not excuse mine." Marcus slowly shook his head. "No, but what matters is what you do after discovering you were wrong." Daniel looked back up, surprised by the absence of anger in Marcus's voice. "You are not upset?" Marcus smiled gently. "Being upset would not help either of us. Learning might." Those simple words seemed to affect everyone listening. The second officer quietly removed his cap for a moment before placing it back on his head. Several people who had recorded the encounter lowered their phones completely. One older veteran, wearing a faded Marine Corps jacket, stepped forward from the edge of the crowd. "Sir," he said to Marcus, "thank you for your service." Marcus nodded respectfully. "Thank you for yours." The veteran smiled before stepping back into the crowd without another word. The Navy captain glanced toward Daniel. "Officer, Mr. Hayes spent decades serving without asking to be recognized. The fact that he requested verification instead of special treatment should have been your strongest clue." Daniel nodded slowly. "I understand that now." One of the federal officials handed Marcus the birthday gift that had remained beside the curb throughout the afternoon. Marcus brushed a small amount of dust from the wrapping paper with remarkable care before slipping the greeting card securely beneath the ribbon. He smiled almost to himself. "Emma will probably tell me I am late," he said softly. The captain laughed quietly. "Then I recommend you let her win." That argument. Marcus chuckled for the first time all afternoon. The sound was warm, genuine, and completely ordinary, making it difficult to imagine that only minutes earlier he had stood at the center of so much uncertainty. Daniel extended his hand. "Mr. Hayes, I hope someday you can forgive my mistake." Marcus accepted the handshake without hesitation. His grip was firm but unhurried. "Officer Brooks, forgiveness is easy when someone is willing to learn. Just promise me one thing." "Anything." "The next person who asks you to verify the truth before reaching a conclusion might deserve the extra minute." Daniel nodded with complete sincerity. "You have my word." Marcus released the handshake, picked up the birthday gift, and looked once toward the waiting government vehicles before smiling. Good. Then today was not wasted after all. Before the final government vehicles pulled away, Marcus Hayes climbed into the waiting sport utility vehicle with the carefully wrapped birthday gift resting safely beside him. The Navy captain closed the door with quiet respect, and the convoy disappeared from the shopping center as smoothly as it had arrived. Within 25 minutes, Marcus was standing on the front porch of his daughter's home, the evening sun washing the neighborhood in a warm golden light. The front door burst open before he even had the chance to knock. 8-year-old Emma raced toward him with the unstoppable excitement only a child could carry. "Grandpa, you made it," she shouted, throwing her arms around him. Marcus smiled as he hugged her tightly. "I told you I would." She looked up with playful suspicion. "You are 5 minutes late." Marcus laughed softly. "You noticed." "I always notice." She reached immediately for the brightly wrapped gift, studying the colorful paper with the same curiosity she showed every science project. Inside the living room, family members welcomed him with smiles, unaware that only an hour earlier federal officials had been searching for him, while an entire shopping center had watched a misunderstanding unfold. Marcus chose not to mention any of it. Instead, he helped Emma assemble the small engineering kit piece by piece across the dining room table. As she carefully snapped the first pieces together, she looked at her grandfather and asked, "Did you have a busy day?" Marcus paused for only a moment before answering. "I met some people who learned something important today." Emma nodded as though that explanation made perfect sense. "Did you learn something too?" Marcus smiled. "I always do." Across town, Officer Daniel Brooks sat quietly inside the patrol vehicle long after the crowd had dispersed. The parking lot looked completely ordinary again. Shopping carts rolled across the pavement. Families carried bags toward their cars. The extraordinary afternoon had already become invisible to everyone except those who had lived through it. Daniel looked down at the small notebook he carried every shift. Instead of recording another report, he wrote a single sentence across the top of a blank page. "Verify first. Assume last." He stared at the words for several seconds before closing the notebook. The lesson had not come from embarrassment alone. It had come from witnessing a man who possessed every reason to become angry, yet chose patience instead. Several weeks later, Daniel received a handwritten envelope at the police station. There was no return address, only his name printed neatly across the front. Inside rested a simple thank you card. It contained only one short message. "Officer Brooks, thank you for listening when it finally mattered. Every day gives us another opportunity to become better than the day before. Respectfully, Marcus Hayes." Folded inside the card was a photograph of Emma proudly holding the completed science project she had built on her birthday. Across the bottom she had written in bright blue marker, "Grandpa says good engineers always check the facts twice." Daniel smiled as he carefully placed the card inside his locker instead of his desk drawer. He knew he would read it again whenever confidence threatened to become certainty. Months passed, and although Marcus continued quietly serving his country whenever duty called, very few people ever learned his name. That suited him perfectly. He had never measured honor by recognition or applause. He believed the greatest victories were often the ones that ended with greater understanding instead of greater conflict. Sometimes the strongest people are not the ones who demand to be believed. They are the ones patient enough to let the truth arrive on its own. And on one ordinary Saturday outside a suburban shopping mall, the loudest sound anyone remembered in the end was not a siren, not a radio, and not a government convoy. It was the quiet dignity of a man who never forgot that real strength is measured not by how much authority someone holds, but by how much character they carry when no one has yet recognized who they truly are.